Hi, my name is Marceline. I walked into my sister's wedding alone, wearing the only dress my mother hadn't mocked. She looked me in the eye and said, "No man will ever want you." Then she shoved me into the fountain, right in front of 300 guests, while my father smirked and called me useless. And as I sat there, drenched and humiliated, I whispered something they didn't hear. Remember this moment. What they didn't know was that 7 minutes later, the man they thought didn't exist, my husband, would walk in and end their golden fantasy forever. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? And has your family ever tried to break you just to feel whole? Let's begin. The first time I heard about my sister's wedding, it wasn't from her. It wasn't from my mother or father either. It was from a coworker who mentioned, in that offhand way people do, "Oh, I think I saw your sister's name on a wedding announcement. Big event at the peninsula, right?" I remember blinking, pretending I already knew. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "That's her." Then I excused myself, went back to my desk, and stared at my phone like it might suddenly light up with a text from my family. It didn't. That evening, I checked my mailbox anyway. Bills, coupons, a charity flyer. No envelope with gold lettering. Nothing with Marceline Voss on it. I stood there for a long time, looking at that empty slot, feeling the same dull ache I'd known my whole life. Forgotten, again. I wasn't surprised, not really. My mother, Lorna, always had a way of pretending I didn't exist, unless she needed something polished, fixed, or hidden. My father, Gideon, kept his silence like it was currency. He'd rather spend it on my sister, Isolde, the golden girl who never made mistakes. Still, I couldn't let them erase me, not this time. I sat on my couch, staring at an old family photo propped on the shelf. In the picture, I was 8, standing beside the fountain in our backyard, water spraying behind me while everyone else smiled for the camera. My mother had told me to move aside a little that day so Isolde could be in the center. I had smiled anyway. "Funny," I murmured now, tracing the edge of that frame. "You've been moving aside all your life, haven't you?" The next morning, I made my decision. I'd go. Invitation or not, I'd walk into that wedding. Not to cause a scene, not to beg for attention, just to remind them that I existed. If I don't show up, I told my reflection, they win again. I spent the rest of the day preparing, quietly, deliberately. I didn't choose anything loud or showy. A deep navy dress, simple lines, nothing glittery. My mother used to say, "You always overdo or underdo, never just right." I could still hear her voice, sharp and cold as glass. But this time, I wanted to be just right, for myself. The city was still clinging to winter when I left for the venue that evening. The air had that wet chill only Chicago knows, biting through my coat as I crossed the street. Lights from Michigan Avenue flickered on the car windows. Every step toward the peninsula felt heavier, but I kept moving. When I pulled up to the valet stand, a young man in a black suit approached my car. He gave me a polite smile, until he read my expression and hesitated. Staff check-in is around the side, ma'am." I smiled faintly. "I'm not staff," I said. "I'm family." He blinked, straightened, then stammered, "Of course, ma'am." He handed me the ticket with an embarrassed nod. Inside, the air smelled of flowers and champagne. Strings of white roses hung from the ceiling. Laughter rippled through the lobby. Every face seemed to glow, every voice familiar, except no one looked at me long enough to recognize me. When I walked into the ballroom, a hush followed me, like a gust of cold air slipping in behind the music. My mother's head turned. She looked straight through me, then back to her guests with that fixed, glittering smile. My father lifted his glass but didn't acknowledge me. And then there was Isolde, radiant, rehearsed, every inch the bride she'd been trained to be. She walked toward me, her gown glinting under the chandelier, her smile so sweet it hurt to look at. "Don't make it about you this time," she whispered as she passed, never breaking stride. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. A hostess led me toward the tables, her voice soft but uncertain. "I'm sorry, Ms. Voss, right? I don't see your name here." "Of course not." I gave her a gentle nod. "That's fine. I'll just sit in the back." I found a spot near the windows, far from the main table. From there, I could see everything. My mother's pearls flashing under the lights, my father shaking hands, the crowd gathered around Isolde like moths to a flame. Beside me, a tall glass of water caught the reflection of the chandelier, shimmering, shifting, almost mocking. Outside, beyond the glass, I could see the fountain in the hotel garden, its water catching the same golden light. Funny, I thought, how water always remembers who drowned in it first. I sat there, quiet, invisible, but fully present. Every breath I took felt like an act of rebellion. Then the MC's voice echoed through the room, cheerful and booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the parents of the bride and her beautiful sister, Isolde Voss." Applause thundered. Glasses clinked. My mother glowed with pride. My father stood tall beside her. But there was no mention of me. I looked down at my reflection in that trembling glass of water and smiled. Just a small, steady smile. "If they won't remember me," I whispered, "I'll make them." But I had no idea what that night would take from me first. As the applause for my sister echoed through the ballroom, I sat still at my table by the window, hands folded in my lap, watching the flicker of the chandeliers across the water in my glass. The sound of clinking silverware and soft laughter spun around me like a silk thread, pulling tighter and tighter. A young usher approached me with a clipboard tucked under one arm. His eyes flicked to mine, then past me. "Miss Voss?" he asked, quietly enough that no one nearby could hear. "Yes," I said. He leaned in. "I've been asked to seat you over here." He gestured to a round table near the double doors that led to the outdoor garden, near the fountain, near the exit. The corners of my mouth curved slightly. Not a smile, just enough to let him know I wasn't surprised. "Of course." From that new table, I had a perfect view of the main stage, the crystal-covered table where my family sat basking in the glow of admiration. My mother and father side by side like royalty, and Isolde in the center like the prize they'd always wanted. Every place card was gilded, every napkin folded just so. Mine was paper, folded once. The air smelled of champagne and peonies. I caught the faint gurgle of the fountain outside through the glass door behind me. It sounded like a whisper trying to be heard over a scream. The speeches began. My father stood, tapping his glass with a fork, eyes gleaming beneath heavy brows. "Family," he said, lifting his glass. "There's nothing more important. I am blessed to stand beside my wife, Lorna, and my daughters, both of them, who've made this day so perfect." The room clapped politely. Some heads turned, looking for that other daughter. My mother laughed lightly, as if brushing off an inside joke. "Oh, she's just a cousin from out of town," she said to the nearest table. I kept my eyes on my glass. The reflection of her diamonds danced across the water like a cruel joke. A few minutes later, I felt a presence behind me. That sharp perfume I'd known since I was 10. Lorna leaned over, adjusting the edge of my dress like she was fixing a wrinkle. Her voice was sugar dipped in acid. "Why did you come, Marceline?" she whispered. "You always ruin things just by being here." I met her eyes. "Maybe I came to see if you'd recognize me this time." She straightened, expression smooth as porcelain, and walked away without a word. Isolde came next. She floated across the floor in white satin, perfect posture, perfect makeup. She bent down beside me and looped an arm around my shoulders for the photographer. "Smile for the camera," she hissed through her teeth, "so people think we actually talk." The photographer blinked, unsure. I smiled anyway. Restraint is the sharpest blade in a room full of velvet. As the flash went off, I felt champagne drip onto my hand. I pulled out a handkerchief from my clutch, ivory, stitched in gold thread, Marceline, for good luck. A gift from someone I no longer spoke to, but somehow had always kept. I dabbed the glass, then folded the handkerchief back neatly. A man at the next table, some distant uncle or maybe a business friend of my father's, chuckled as he leaned toward me. "You must be the cousin from the poor side." My father didn't correct him. He didn't even flinch. He just sipped his drink and smirked. I turned slightly toward the glass door, toward the fountain just beyond it, still burbling away under the night sky. At least water doesn't lie. My body stayed still, but my mind began moving, fast, not with plans, but with memories. Of every Christmas morning, I waited for them to remember me. Of every birthday party I planned alone. Of the scholarship I earned that no one showed up to celebrate. The ache in my chest wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity. I stood to leave. My fingers gripped my clutch like a lifeline. But Lorna was already approaching, all silk and sparkle, her voice raised just enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Leaving already, dear," she called. "You can't even handle joy, can you?" She reached for me with an exaggerated laugh, and before I could step back, I felt her palm press hard against my shoulder. One moment I was standing, the next, I was drenched. The cold hit first, sharp, alive, shocking. Then came the laughter, a wave of it, high-pitched, shallow, and endless. I sat in the hotel fountain, blinking water from my lashes as strangers clapped and cheered. They thought it was part of the entertainment. "You can't even get a poor man to look at you," my mother shouted through her grin, flicking her hair like nothing had happened. My father stood with his hand on Isolde's back, his face still smug. "Useless," he said. "Get out." No one stopped the laughter. No one offered me a hand. I pulled myself up, water dripping from my dress, my hair plastered to my skin. Slowly, calmly, I reached into the shallow water and retrieved the handkerchief. I looked at the gold-stitched name, my name, one last time. Then I let it go. It floated in the fountain, bobbing gently. I turned toward my mother, her face powdered to perfection, her lipstick untouched. I took one step forward, water squishing in my heels, and met her gaze. "Remember this moment." The room went silent. Forks stopped midair. The band quieted, and I walked out, not fast, not dramatic, just steady, as if the water had baptized me into something new. But what they didn't know was, I wasn't walking out alone. I didn't need anyone to follow me. I carried something out of that ballroom no one could see. The final thread of illusion finally snapped. The courtyard behind the ballroom was nearly empty. A few cigarette butts littered the edges of the stone walkway, and the scent of overwatered hydrangeas lingered in the cool air. The fountain gurgled behind me as if it had something to say. Or maybe it was just echoing what I already knew. This was always going to happen. I slipped off my soaked heels and set them beside me on the stone ledge. My toes curled against the cold granite. My dress clung to my skin like it had been painted on. I felt the weight of water in every movement, like I was dragging years of silence behind me. My fingers combed through my damp hair. The sting of public humiliation should have burned more, but instead there was a strange quiet, a silence that felt earned. "Remember this moment," I whispered again, this time to myself. Not as a warning, but as a vow. From where I sat, I could still hear the muffled bass line of the reception. the DJ spinning some happy, danceable pop song, while inside my sister twirled in her designer gown under chandeliers. Through the glass doors, I saw Lorna's silhouette, tall, proud, untouched. She laughed with a cluster of well-dressed guests, her wine glass in hand, her hair still perfectly in place. Her performance was flawless, and just like that, I realized they didn't need me to be invisible anymore. They had already written me out of the script. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out with wet fingers and saw a text from Audrey, a colleague from work. Audrey? Saw the live stream. That was brutal, but they deleted it fast. I blinked. Live stream? I opened Instagram, then Twitter, then the wedding's hashtag. Nothing. No photos of the moment I was pushed. No video of my mother's laughter. Nothing of me at all. Not even the awkward family shot Isolde had forced earlier. They'd erased me, the same way they used to crop me out of family photos as a child. Or how I was always just out of frame in vacation albums. The time I graduated college and they left right after the ceremony for Isolde's pageant prep. Or that Christmas I spent alone because the family forgot I was in town. I used to believe they just overlooked me. Maybe I wasn't loud enough. Maybe I didn't shine right. But sitting there with digital proof vanishing before my eyes, I understood. They didn't forget me. They chose to delete me. My thumb hovered over the screen. My image, my existence, gone with a few clicks. The screen blurred as tears welled up, but they didn't fall. Not this time. I closed the apps and slipped the phone back into my clutch. My hands shook, not from sadness, but from something sharper, something older. The fountain kept murmuring beside me, no, longer, cruel, almost kind. Ma'am? I turned. A young man in a peninsula uniform stood nearby, holding a folded towel. His voice was gentle, unsure. I just saw what happened, he said. You handled that better than most would have. I gave him a soft smile. Not pity, not gratitude, just human recognition. I've had practice, I said, accepting the towel. It was thick and warm from the dryer. I wrapped it around my shoulders, pressing it to my arms where the cold had settled deep. He didn't linger. He just nodded and walked away. A simple act of decency. From a stranger, not family, not blood, but real. I leaned back on my palms, letting the towel weigh down the bitterness that threatened to rise again. A moment passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. Time didn't feel linear anymore. Then a low rumble. Headlights swept across the courtyard as a sleek black SUV pulled up to the valet lane just beyond the hedges. The driver stepped out quickly and opened the back door. Out stepped a man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark tailored suit. His face was mostly obscured in the dim light, but the way the valet stiffened told me he wasn't just anyone. I didn't react. I was too tired. The man said something quietly to the driver, then turned and looked toward the ballroom. Not at me, not yet. I turned my gaze back to the water. Let them have their secrets. Let them have their show. But I knew. Something was about to change. Something had followed me out of that ballroom. Not pity, not shame, power. And it wasn't theirs anymore. As I stood to adjust the towel around me, the valet rushed from the side entrance. "Ma'am," he called, breathless. "Someone asked if you're still here." I turned, slow and sure. The hotel doors opened behind him, and the man stepped fully into the courtyard light. His eyes met mine, steady, unapologetic. He wasn't here for the wedding, he was here for me. And just like that, their story stopped being about me and became mine again. I stepped back into the ballroom, not because I needed to be there, but because they needed to know I could be. Not wet anymore, but wrapped in a shawl one of the hotel staff had lent me. I walked in with the kind of silence that makes people nervous. It wasn't the kind of silence that begged to be pitied. It was the kind that made people remember they'd done something wrong. Eyes shifted, conversations dipped, then restarted, louder than before, forced. Isolde paused mid-laugh with her bridesmaids. Her glass froze halfway to her lips. Lorna didn't even flinch. She turned just enough to acknowledge that I'd entered, then turned back toward the photographer. Always camera ready. My shoes made no sound against the polished marble, but my presence cracked the air like static. A young usher, maybe 19 at most, hurried toward me, his cheeks flushing as he fidgeted with the slim tablet in his hands. "Ms. Voss?" he asked, uncertain. "There's been a slight change with seating." Of course there had. He led me toward the back, past the family table, past the cousins and old friends, past the neighbors from our block who used to bring casseroles when we were kids and pretend not to notice the yelling inside our house. My original seat. Gone. No place card. Not even a spare chair. I think your seat was reassigned," the usher murmured. He gestured toward a lonely chair, shoved awkwardly beside a half-shuttered door near the catering station. The hum of refrigeration buzzed low beside it, a direct line to the restrooms, and conveniently out of sight of the cameras. "Here's fine," I said, cutting off his stammering apology. He nodded, relieved, and backed away like I was something hot he didn't know how to carry. I sat, folding the shawl tighter around my arms. I faced forward, back straight, hands folded in my lap, like I had all the time in the world. The fountains still shimmered beyond the glass, their soft splash echoing faintly through the closed doors. The same water. But I didn't feel small anymore. The microphone cracked as my father stood. He cleared his throat, not from nerves, but to call the room to attention. He always loved a stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gideon began, smiling with that politician polish that somehow charmed even the people he talked down to. "Thank you for your grace and understanding tonight. Families, you know, our emotions can get the best of us. Like champagne, it bubbles up, spills over." The crowd chuckled awkwardly. A few hands clapped. A few eyes glanced at me, then quickly away. He smoothed his tie and continued. "But in the end, we're all here for the same reason, to celebrate love and unity." Unity. The man who couldn't remember my birthday without checking his assistant's notes dared to preach about unity. He raised his glass, and the room obediently followed. I didn't move. Then came Isolde. She stood with grace only someone coached since toddlerhood could fake convincingly. Her white gown glistened under the lights, her smile bright enough to reflect off every wine glass. "Thank you, everyone," she said, eyes wet just enough to suggest sincerity. "It means so much to share this moment with those who've always supported me, with family who's been there through everything." Her gaze drifted across the room. For a brief second, it locked with mine. Something flickered, not regret, calculation, the kind of look someone gives a crack in the wall they thought they'd plastered over. I didn't blink. I mouthed, clearly, slowly, "Don't." She looked away first. Lorna leaned toward a group of women seated near her, dabbing the corner of her eyes like she'd just been moved by something profound. Then she leaned in closer, her voice low, but not so low that it couldn't be heard by exactly the right people. "Poor thing," she said, nodding vaguely in my direction. "She's not, well, always had trouble adjusting. You know how sensitive types can be." The woman next to her, probably someone's aunt, gave a pitying nod. Another tilted her head as if watching a wounded bird flap against glass. It was all rehearsed. The story had been practiced long before tonight. And yet, even now, I didn't give them the outburst they were hoping for. I crossed my legs, lifted my chin, and gave no one anything to chew on. That's when it came. A folded white napkin, placed gently beside my glass of untouched champagne. I hadn't seen the server's face, but I caught the movement. Subtle, practiced. Inside, a handwritten note. Block letters. They think the cameras didn't catch it, but I saw. Everyone did. My pulse slowed. Not quickened, slowed. The way it does when the truth starts crawling back up your spine. I folded the napkin carefully, slipped it into my clutch. My fingers didn't shake. For the first time that evening, I smiled. Not politely, not for show. It was small, but it was real. I wasn't alone, and I'd never really been invisible. They'd just spent too much effort trying to make it so. The clinking of glasses caught my attention. Lorna stood now, holding her champagne aloft. "Everyone," she cooed, "let's raise a glass to second chances, for those who need them most." She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. I stood slowly, lifted my own glass. The room quieted just a breath, sensing the shift. I met my mother's gaze across the tables. "Some people don't need second chances," I said, voice calm, "just witnesses." And I toasted. To every server, every whispered truth, every unedited camera angle. To the sound of water, still flowing outside, still remembering. And that night, I learned. Witnesses can become weapons. By the time I reached my suite, the hotel had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, not peaceful. I stepped out onto the balcony and leaned against the glass, still damp from the earlier chill. Below, the city shimmered like a field of broken stars. From up here, everything looked clean, distant, controlled. A far cry from what was unraveling inside me. My hair, still damp around the edges, stuck to my neck. I pulled it away and stared at my reflection, faint and ghost-like against the night skyline. Lights blinked through the silhouette of my face, and for a moment I looked like I didn't belong to either world. Not the one out there, not the one in here. "They erased me in front of everyone," I whispered. The words floated up like breath on cold glass. "But I'm still here." Inside the room, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I walked back in, leaving the balcony door cracked, letting in the hum of the city and the occasional car horn echoing from somewhere blocks away. There it was, a message from an unknown number. "Thought you might want this before they pretend it never happened." A link followed. My heart slowed. Not panic, awareness. I tapped it. It was the wedding livestream, the full version. Not the version they cut and edited before scrubbing me out like a blemish. This one included the shove, the laughter, the sound of my mother's voice ringing out, sharp and sweet and cruel. I watched it once. Then I downloaded it and saved it to a private folder. No dramatic reaction, no shaking hands. I just saved it like someone saving a receipt. Proof, not pain. And yet the pain lingered, deeper, older. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I let myself drift. Not into sleep, into memory. I was 10 when my mother knelt beside me and said, "You're better off staying quiet. You don't need to be the center of attention. That's your sister's place." I remember how she smoothed my hair with one hand and handed Isolde a new pair of ballet slippers with the other. At 20, after I gave a speech in college that won a small award, my father said, "That was good, Marcy. You've always been better at helping others shine. You're not the spotlight type, you're support." Every compliment came with a leash, and I wore it, thinking it was protection, until now. The phone buzzed again. Isolde. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was soft, rehearsed. "Hey, are you okay?" I didn't reply. Look, I know tonight got out of hand, but Mom's upset. You know how she gets. She didn't mean it." I stayed silent, let her keep talking. "We'd really appreciate it if you didn't post anything. There's already enough talk. Let's not add fuel, okay?" I smiled, not out of amusement, but because I heard what she wasn't saying, what none of them would ever say directly. "Don't worry, I said, voice steady. I won't post anything. I ended the call before she could thank me. Then I stood and walked back toward the bathroom. The mirror caught me, full frame. I paused. My dress had dried, but the faint red mark at my jawline hadn't faded. A bruise, blooming slow from where I'd hit the fountain edge. Not severe, just enough to remind me it happened. I leaned in, searching my own eyes. If silence built their kingdom, I murmured, then silence will be the storm that breaks it. The knock at the door came soft, quick. I crossed the room and opened it. No one was there, just an envelope, no name, no note. Inside was a photo, printed from what looked like a phone screen. A man, half-shadowed, stepping through the lobby doors at the venue. My husband. I hadn't seen him, not all night, but someone had, and someone wanted me to know. Tucked inside the envelope was one line, handwritten in clean, confident print. They think you're alone. You're not. I looked at the photo again, then back out at the city. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something return, something steady. Not hope, not yet, but presence. The awareness of still being here, and no longer waiting for someone else to hand me permission to exist. I picked up my phone, opened the saved video file, and scrolled to the exact frame the moment my mother's hand met my shoulder and pushed. The water had splashed, the guests had gasped, and the cameras had kept rolling. They just didn't count on anyone saving it. The screen glowed in my hand as the city lights blinked behind my reflection. They wanted the world to forget me, I whispered. My finger hovered above the screen. I think it's time the world remembered. And the next morning, the first crack appeared in their perfect mirror. The sun was pale when I drove up the winding road to my parents' estate in Evanston. The marble lions guarding the gate were the same as they'd been since childhood, majestic, cold, unfeeling. Their faces hadn't aged a day, unlike the people inside. The hedges were trimmed to perfection, roses pruned within an inch of their lives. Everything here looked expensive, except the truth. I parked beside my father's black sedan. The house loomed above, all glass and pretense. I could see my own reflection in the massive front windows. Small, framed by the illusion they'd built. I rang the bell, though I knew I didn't need to. They'd been expecting me. The door opened to my mother's smile. Warm, fake, stretched like an actress halfway through her scene. "Marceline," she said, voice honeyed, "you came. I wasn't sure after last night." "Why wouldn't I?" I stepped inside, wiping my shoes on the marble floor. "You love a good family gathering." Her jaw tightened for just a second before she turned toward the dining room. The scent of coffee and maple syrup filled the air, but it couldn't mask the tension. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table, reading the Wall Street Journal like nothing had happened. Isolde sat across from him, glowing in her newlywed hangover, her perfect hair in a perfect bun. A vase of lilies sat in the center, white, flawless, and already starting to wilt. "Morning," I said, pulling out a chair. "Morning," Isolde murmured. She didn't meet my eyes. The silence that followed was too deliberate to be casual. My mother finally broke it. "You embarrassed us," she said softly, spreading butter on her toast. "You should apologize to your sister." I smiled. "For falling or for standing back up?" The knife in her hand froze mid-air. The air shifted. My father lowered his paper. "Marceline," he said, his tone measured. "Enough with the dramatics. You've humiliated this family long enough." "By showing up to a wedding I wasn't invited to?" I asked lightly. His nostrils flared. "Don't play innocent. You've been a problem since you walked through that door." "That's funny," I said, sipping my coffee. "That's the same thing you said the day I was born." The paper crumpled slightly in his hand. My mother's eyes darted toward him, a silent warning. "You think this is a joke?" he snapped. You've destroyed years of reputation with your little stunt. Stay out of our affairs, Marceline. You're not one of us anymore. That last line landed like a verdict, but I didn't flinch. I placed my cup down slowly, letting the soft clink fill the air. You can't take away what I never accepted, I said. His hand came down hard on the table. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. The vase toppled, water spilling across the mirror centerpiece. The glass split clean down the middle. For a moment, I just stared at it, the literal reflection of what we were. Fractured, irreparable. Isolde jumped at the sound. "Please," she whispered, "can we just stop fighting? Not today." I turned my gaze toward her. "You don't have to inherit their cruelty," I said quietly. Her eyes glistened, then dropped to the table. She didn't answer. Maybe she couldn't. Then came the sound that changed everything. A buzz, short and sharp. My father's phone lit up beside his plate. He picked it up, squinting at the screen. "What is it?" my mother asked. His expression shifted from irritation to something worse, shock, then fear. He turned the screen for her to see. Her face went pale. It was the video, the shove, the laughter, the fountain, the whole thing, already viral. Over 300,000 views in less than an hour. Comments flooding in. "That poor woman. Who treats family like that? Money doesn't buy decency." My mother's hands trembled. "Who did this?" she hissed. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth roll down my throat. Maybe the internet decided it was tired of fairy tales. Her head snapped toward me. "You—" "I didn't post anything," I said, calm and clear. "You told me not to, remember?" The silence that followed was thicker than smoke. My father's knuckles turned white against the edge of the table. He was still pretending to be in control, but I could see it, the panic bleeding through his composure. For the first time in my life, he didn't know what to say. I stood slowly, setting my napkin beside my plate. "You should probably get ahead of it," I said. "Damage control, press statements, spin tactics. You're good at that." My mother rose halfway from her chair. "Marceline, sit down." But I didn't. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded check, sliding it onto the table. "For the mirror," I said, "and the roses. You'll need it." Then I walked out, the echo of my heels clicking across the marble, over the broken glass still glistening on the floor. "Marceline," my father shouted, "you'll regret this." I stopped at the doorway but didn't turn back. "I already did," I said softly. "For 30 years. Outside, the morning was sharp and bright. The cold air cut through the last of the perfume and pretense still clinging to my clothes. I was halfway to the car when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "He's seen the video. He's coming to you." I froze, the wind tugging at my coat. I whispered, staring at the screen. And just like that, I realized I wasn't the only storm they'd awakened. By dusk, the Voss estate was ringed with news vans and flashing cameras. The iron gates that once felt impenetrable now looked like props from a failed stage play, a set crumbling in real time. From the second-floor window, I could see reporters pacing, lights blinking red, microphones ready to catch whatever pieces fell next. A headline had already taken over the morning. "Bride's sister humiliated on live stream, public turns on powerful Voss family." Inside the house, my mother was pacing too, but not for the same reason. "You ruined us," she cried, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, voice trembling in a way that wasn't entirely from shame. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stayed where I was, leaning against the doorframe of the sitting room. "I didn't ruin anything, Mother. You and Dad did that a long time ago. I just stopped hiding it for you." She froze. For a moment, I thought she might collapse again, like at breakfast. But instead, she turned and walked out, silent. The walls felt thinner than they had hours ago. Isolde hadn't come out of her room. My father, somewhere in his study, probably shredding documents or yelling at legal counsel. I didn't care. The house had become hollow. A mausoleum for lies dressed as legacy. Then I heard it. A low, deliberate hum. The sound of engines, not one but several, gliding up the driveway. I stepped out onto the porch, just in time to see the black convoy pull through the gates. Security hesitated, confused. No one had buzzed. No one announced themselves. But the gate opened all the same, smooth, like it knew better than to get in the way. My father stormed out the front door, his coat half on, anger flaring in every step. "Who the hell is that?" I didn't look at him. I looked at the car that had stopped directly in front of the estate's grand staircase. "You'll see," I said. The engine cut, the back door opened, and Victor stepped out. His presence didn't need to be announced. It spoke for itself. Dark tailored suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, like the world bowed to him before he had to ask. His cufflinks caught the last rays of sun, and the weight he carried wasn't in his frame. It was in the air around him. He didn't look at the house, or the cameras, or my father. He looked at me. "You all right?" he asked, voice low, firm. I nodded once. "I am now." That was all it took. Every memory of humiliation, every whispered lie, every time I had been told to sit still and smile. They all fell away. I wasn't the fragile daughter anymore. I wasn't even the sister of the bride. I was his wife, and they had no idea. Victor finally turned toward my father, who was squinting, unsure whether to bluster or retreat. "You enjoy humiliating women?" Victor asked calmly. "This is a private matter," my father snapped. "Not anymore." With a quiet motion, Victor handed him a folded piece of paper. My father opened it, read it, then turned ghostly white. "That's impossible," he whispered. This is our property." Victor tilted his head slightly. "Was. You should start packing." My mother came rushing out, her voice already cracking. "You can't do this. This is our home." Victor didn't answer her. He looked at me instead. "Should I stop?" I held his gaze, then shook my head. "No, they never stopped when it was me." And just like that, the weight shifted. The air turned. Even the wind felt different, colder, cleaner. The front doors opened behind us. Isolde appeared at the threshold, lips parted in disbelief. She didn't say anything, but I saw it. In her eyes, the question. How long had this been coming? I walked down the steps slowly, past my father still clutching the deed, past my mother sobbing into her hands. Victor offered me his jacket. It was beginning to rain. Just a drizzle, soft and clean, falling over everything that once looked untouchable. He placed it gently over my shoulders, and then the shutters clicked. The press had captured it, all of it, the fall, the rise, the reckoning. Someone shouted, "Marceline, is it true? Is he your husband?" Another voice. "Did he just buy the entire estate?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Victor extended his arm and I took it. Together we walked through the open gates, through the storm of cameras, past the curious, the judgmental, the amazed, not hiding, not shrinking. And the caption that trended later that night read, "The woman they tried to bury. She walked away with the crown." As we entered the car, the door closing with that satisfying final click, Victor turned to me. "You could have told me sooner," he said. I looked out the window once before facing him. "You had to see it yourself." He nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure no one forgets." That night, I barely slept. The city moved beneath us. Sirens, horns, wind off the lake, all of it pulsing under the glass walls of Victor's penthouse. But inside, it was still, almost too quiet, like the eye of a storm. I lay awake beside him, the hum of Chicago carrying the weight of everything that had shifted. When dawn broke, it did so with no mercy. My phone lit up like a switchboard. Text after text, voicemails piling up, email alerts blinking like warning lights. Headlines, interviews, questions. The video had crossed 5 million views by sunrise. Victor stood near the window, legal files in hand, hair slightly tousled from sleep. He didn't look tired. He looked ready. "They're scrambling," he said without turning around. "Your father's firm is under audit. IRS, SEC, even the foundation accounts." I sat up, ran a hand through my hair. "Good. Let them drown in paperwork, not water." He smirked but didn't laugh. There wasn't room for humor yet, not when the truth was still unraveling in real time. He walked over, slid a sealed envelope onto the bed. "Say the word, and I'll take everything they own." I opened it without touching the paper inside. Power of attorney, frozen assets, class action support, all legal, all precise, all ready. I looked up at him. "I don't want their house, or their cars, or whatever shell companies they think will protect them. I just want my silence back." "You're sure?" I nodded. "They stole my voice for 30 years. I don't want revenge. I want the last word." He leaned in, kissed my forehead, and said nothing else. By mid-morning, I was sitting across from a polished woman named Dana Price, Victor's media advisor. Hair in a bun sharp enough to cut glass, glasses low on her nose, voice smoother than most jazz records. "We've set the press conference for noon," she said. "All major outlets confirmed. Are you ready for this?" I didn't hesitate. They lied about me in public. I'll end it in public. Dana paused, assessing. Wear something strong, symbolic. I already knew what I'd wear. By 11:30, I was standing behind a closed door inside the offices of Clayton & Moore, Chicago's oldest law firm. Outside, a wall of cameras waited. I took one last look in the mirror. White suit, clean lines, no jewelry, no distractions. It wasn't armor, it was rebirth. Victor stood behind me, silent. "You don't have to go out there," he said. "I do," I replied. When I stepped onto the small stage, the noise evaporated. Every lens turned toward me. Phones raised, pens readied. I took a breath. "For years," I began, "I stayed quiet to keep peace in a home that never had any." The words rang clear, not bitter, not angry, just honest. They told me to be graceful, to be small, to never embarrass the family. I did what they asked. I carried secrets that weren't mine. I smiled when I wanted to scream, and when I finally stood up, they pushed me into a fountain in front of hundreds. I let the silence hang. But here's the thing about silence. When it ends, it echoes. I spoke of the control, the manipulation, the guilt masked as love, of how they tried to break me quietly, behind doors, under smiles. Family doesn't mean ownership, love doesn't mean control, and respect isn't a favor, it's a birthright. The room didn't move. You could feel the shift. Reporters realizing they weren't covering a scandal. They were witnessing a shift in power. And to those who asked why I didn't speak sooner, I wasn't afraid of them. I was afraid no one would believe me. But now you've seen it, and you can't unsee it. When I finished, I walked away from the mic without looking back. An hour later, new reports started breaking. Fraud, embezzlement, illegal lobbying. The empire my family built on image was collapsing under the weight of documentation. Screens everywhere started flashing headlines. Victor slipped beside me in the hallway, his voice low. "You ended them with words." I looked down at my palms. Words are what they used to bury me. I just learned to dig with sharper ones. Outside, the building's marble steps led into sunlight. As we exited, no one shouted. No camera bulbs blinded. just soft applause. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't forced, it felt earned. A little girl standing near the edge of the crowd tugged her mother's sleeve, then pointed at me. "She's brave," she whispered. I crouched beside her, smiling faintly. "No, sweetheart, I just stopped being afraid." And I meant it. As I stood back up, Dana rushed toward me holding her phone. "There's a new statement," she said. "From your sister." My spine stiffened. "What did she say?" Dana hesitated. "She wants to see you, alone." I didn't move, didn't answer, but inside something cracked, just a little. Not everything about fire is destruction. Sometimes it clears space for something new. I left the press hall with the echo of applause still warm behind me, but by the time I reached the cafe near the river, the city had quieted into late afternoon light. The kind of hour where people slow down, shoulders loosen, and conversation softens. It was peaceful. Not because things were resolved, but because I'd made peace with the fact that not everything could be. I arrived early, as I always do when the stakes are high. The host didn't ask my name. I guess when your face is on every major news outlet, you stop needing introductions. I chose a table by the window where the sunlight hit the surface of the river just right. The ripples danced lazily, reflecting gold and steel and sky. I touched the glass gently, not for the view, but to feel something solid. Funny. The water's the same, but I'm not. I ordered a coffee I barely touched. My hands were steady, but there was a quiet pull inside me, a tension I hadn't named yet. I wasn't afraid of Isolde. I was afraid of what she might still be capable of taking, even now. She arrived 15 minutes late. No entourage, no makeup. Her hair pulled back, her clothes plain and wrinkled, like she'd dressed in the dark. She hesitated at the door before spotting me, then walked over with the slow, uncertain gait of someone not sure if they'd be welcomed or removed. "You look different," I said, my voice low, even. She sat down without answering at first. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Makeup would have hidden that once. Today, she didn't bother. "I feel different," she whispered. The silence between us stretched, full of everything we'd never said. She reached for the menu, then changed her mind and set it back down. Her hands trembled. "I didn't come to explain away what I did," she finally said. I need to tell the truth." I nodded. "Then say it." She took a breath that looked like it hurt. "Mom told me to stay quiet that night. She said if I tried to defend you, I'd ruin the wedding, the family, everything. And I believed her. I knew what they were doing. Her voice cracked. "I needed them to love me." I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. I just listened. "And you thought throwing me under the bus was the price?" "I didn't throw you," she said, her eyes pleading. "I froze. I shut down. I didn't help. I let it happen. And I'm sorry." "Not helping is still a choice," I said. She nodded slowly. "I know." There was no dramatic music, no tears flooding the table. Just quiet acknowledgement, the kind that feels heavier than any screaming match ever could. After a while, she asked, "Will you ever forgive me?" I looked past her, out toward the water. A boat passed slowly, kids laughing on the deck. I remembered being their age, sitting on this river walk with ice cream dripping down our wrists. Isolde had wrapped her napkin around my cone so I wouldn't lose it. "Forgiveness isn't about you," I said. "It's about not carrying you anymore." A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. I stood up slowly, placing both palms on the table, not in anger, just to ground myself. My reflection in the window caught me by surprise, and beside it, hers. For the first time, they were side by side, not one shadowing the other. I reached into my bag and pulled out a photo. A Polaroid from decades ago. Two little girls with chocolate on their faces and matching bows in their hair. Before manipulation, before control, before the roles were assigned. I set it down gently. "Keep it," I said. "Remember what we lost, not what I took." Isolde picked it up with shaky fingers. Her eyes didn't meet mine again. I walked away before she could say anything else. Outside, the air had cooled. A breeze swept through the walkway, rustling napkins and ponytails, carrying the scent of coffee and lake water. I slipped on my sunglasses, not to hide, but to let myself be unseen for just a moment. Somewhere to my left, a group of teenagers laughed, one of them balancing a soda can on his forehead. The sound didn't sting. It didn't remind me of what was lost. It just existed, and that was enough. I paused by the railing, looking out over the water. This time, I wasn't drowning. I wasn't fighting for air. I wasn't hoping someone would pull me back up. I was breathing, deeply, freely, finally. They laughed when I walked in alone, I thought, but I was never truly alone. I just hadn't met myself yet. My heels clicked against the pavement as I moved forward. Not rushed, not slow, just steady. Maybe one day she'll join me by the water again, but if not, I'll still be here, free. Why?